now that we're a little bit into class, but and we've just been talking about what the plan is for the next little bit. So what I want us to do today is we're going to go over some of these guards. What's really important to me is that we have internalized moving through multiple guards. So we're going to start, we can start at the top. We can really start with that high terse. So I want to go back to something that I said, I want to say it was last week, may have been a couple of weeks ago. Each position, if we look at it, has a point up and a point down variant, with the exception of the lower guards. With the lower guards, you have a hand up and hand down position. But from above, we have our high terse and we have our high prime, and it's just a question of whether your hand is up or your hand is down. No, I was actually, yeah. Well, high prime is on the other side. No, it's here. Anyway. So we have our high terse. If we step into it, our high octave. I wanted to point out something about the high octave. So the high octave is great as long as you are using it as a position to step into. If you're using it as a parry from here, and this is your parry and you're not covering any distance, by pulling the elbow, we've just pulled everything back. So we might be able to parry, but we're going to have to move forward to make the follow-up cut from here, because we can't just parry here and then, I guess you could thrust underneath, but because it's going back over the arm, it doesn't give us a real position to move from. So any of our high guards, most of our high guards, we are going to parry, and then we're going to cut. So we can do that a couple of times. We're just imagining somebody cutting at us from that number one. We are going to parry, roll it off, and cut. I haven't talked about the traverse step much for this. This was one of the videos that I looked at today. I watched. The idea with the traverse step is you're here, and we're never going to traverse forward this way, but we might traverse by moving our back foot off the line this way and stepping off this way. So that's not the normal traverse that we're used to, right? Normal traverse we're used to is you're crossing your feet, you're uncrossing your feet. You don't want to do that, especially with a saber, because once you get here, it's really easy for them to push in quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that back foot. We're just going to step off this way. And all that does is that changes our line. We're here, we're on line, we step. You're going to parry, you can do whatever you're going to do. So again, terse, we're going to catch it in terse, we're going to step. And we can do that with a traverse because we can catch it in terse and actually cut on the same side. We can cut, we can step. The idea is that we're just going to parry it here, and then we're going to move it around to cut. Octave, we're just going to go from that middle, drop the point, and catch it. And then we can cut around to the other side. That's requiring more of a passing step, right? That's okay. It's all right for us to make a passing step. Traditionally, you wouldn't, but I think that if it means that you are stepping to the outside and then you're able to do something else, it opens up your footwork in a way that people don't think about a lot with most saber fencing, with most foil fencing. You don't ever think a lot about, okay, I'm going to cross my feet, but you could cross your feet. I mean, you can lunge that way, right? You can step to the outside. If you're trying to cover a lot of distance, we can step, boom. Now we're taking a lot of distance. We're taking a lot of measure. So those two, we have high terse, we have that octave. St. George's Guard. I wanted to mention something about all of these today, actually. So I spent some time this week outside of Hutton. I don't remember which one I was using, but it seems like Hutton is peculiar in his standing with your weight off that front foot. Some of the older manuals talk about keeping your weight 50-50 because that allows the ability to move quickly forward and backward, and you're keeping that weight centered. So we have been talking and we've been practicing a lot, keeping that weight back so that you can step. I think that's one way to do it, but I don't want us to get really hard and fast on this idea that we are going to stay back weighted all the time. Not only that, I will promise you that it is better for your feet and for your legs if you're practicing pretty 50-50 and then you shift and move your foot. On that same vein with footwork, one thing that I have seen done before is when you are lunging, rather than coming out toe and then heel, is you're essentially rocking it out, landing with your heel, rolling your foot forward. So you're actually stepping out this way. So with these cuts, if we want to work on that footwork, we're imagining somebody cutting, again, they're making that one cut. So they're going to cut, we're going to parry with terse, or they're going to cut, we're going to parry with that high octave. Terse, octave, terse, octave. Something I will mention here about that medium guard, because I think it may be helpful, is if we think about that medium guard as the center of a joystick, and the way that a properly working joystick, you move it and then it comes right back down to the center position. That's really what that medium guard is. Here and then back. We may step back to keep that line covered and then go back, but if we think about that medium guard as that center position on the joystick, it might be valid to think, well, it doesn't necessarily do anything, right? You're playing a video game, it doesn't do anything to just stay in the middle. Now, if you press it down, it'd be the equivalent of you're in that middle and you thrust. Cool. But so we're going to do our St. George's Guard. We're going to do the same thing, except on this one, we're 100% stepping to the outside because from here, that's our best option. So we're going to catch it. We're going to roll that point. Catch it. Roll the point. here, catch it. We'll do a few of those. Okay, our next two. We have that high prime and that high quart. So these are to the inside. So they're making that number 2 cut. We're gonna catch it, we're gonna step in, we're gonna catch it, and then we're gonna probably parry by moving out of the way and then making a cut somehow else. This is really a bad position to do much of anything because you almost have to like roll into high octave to cut to that side. It stops it, but it doesn't give you the inclination towards your next step as intuitively. They're making that cut, pull, this stops it. You may push and then thrust, that's fine. But just know that this may be a stopgap measure where you're stopping here just to stop it. If we want to think about it in a comparative way, think about it similar to the crown guard. You catch it in crown, then you have to do something else. In this case, we're catching it, we're stopping that motion, but then we have to do something else to actually make that cut work. So we can do a few of those. We're just coming from that middle position, just that neutral joystick position. Catch it, catch it, catch it, catch it.
That or whether says this or not, I don't know, but a easy follow-up that I see is collecting it and keeping that, fairly close, and then stepping out and simply cutting horizontally across the head, because at that point, once you've collected, you're on the inside and you can simply cut across.
Yeah, yeah. And that's definitely an option with it, right? 100% what you're doing is you're stopping that attack. So you're catching it, you're going to stop it right there on your guard. And then, yeah, maybe you do. Maybe you cut underneath. I mean, you've slowed that momentum. If you come off, you could actually even turn on the blade, and now you're cutting on the inside. So I think there's some options there. I just don't know that they're as intuitive as some of the other things that we've done. So if we look at that high prime is over here, but I don't know. Actually, that one feels like he's putting it this way. Yeah, he's going to the inside. He's not even bringing it across. He's just going in here. So if we're bringing it to the outside, essentially we may have to step into it. Something this way. His hand is turning. It's like his hand is above. Actually, his hand is this way. So it may just be if they're cutting this way, we're going to step, we're going to cut it. But that prime gives you that option because you've blocked it, you then can thrust from there. I would also argue in this diagram that prime might be in the wrong position, but that's questionable to me because Prime really has this tendency of blocking to the outside, to the outside versus to the inside. But we can think about that as we want. If somebody is making a cut, the idea though is prime and thrust in. Prime, thrust in. And it could be too that what he's doing is he's bringing that prime. Prime is never going to be in such a way that I have blocked, but I've left all this open, right? It's going to go across the body. So it might be that we just bring that prime high, so we're catching it out here, but then we have some options to cut around. Depends on where your point ends up. It depends on if there is a clean line that we can thrust from here or not, but those are some of our options. Any observations on those that people have seen that they feel like is off or suddenly makes sense to them now that hasn't made sense to them before?
I just like messing with that alternate footwork, honestly.
Oh, with the reverse step, where we're stepping off this way?
Yeah, we're stepping off to the side and just playing with your weight lets you mess with your footwork as well. If you're messing with the weight distribution to your front and trail legs.
So one thing that we can look at with that too is that if I go back to my feet, if I'm doing that traverse and I'm covering backwards, I then can step to this outside, which then means that things that were on the inside before are that much further on the inside, but then I have then moved to the right. So I've traversed and now I've stepped off this way versus going this way. In fact, in much the same way that the traverse works with longsword, I would argue that a traverse is great if you're stepping to this side. If you're stepping to this side, you're really better off just stepping into it and then moving off the line. Good. Other observations? Okay. So those are our counters to our cut 1 and our cut 2. We'll work on the middle ones now. So we have our high second, which is the outside here. Again, I feel like these are weird. So this is your high second, this is your low second. I feel like this is where Hutton splits hairs that he doesn't have to. I'd rather lump them in together because basically what you're doing is you're catching it here. And going too low, you don't want to be inches off the ground. If it's that low, if they're aiming for your ankle, this really should block most of it. In fact, it could block most of it with a slip. So we're here, we're in that middle, they cut to the ankle, they slip, catch it. And then I'm right back up. And I'm just moving it on the inside of that line and flipping that wrist. So we'll practice that a little bit. They're aiming at that ankle. We are just in middle. We're going to go into second, cut right back up. We're in middle, step back, we're going to catch it in second. I feel like the slipping the leg footwork is something that the more we get used to and the better we feel about it, it is universal. It shows up in longsword. I don't know that Fiore specifically calls it slipping the leg, but when he's talking about don't cut below the knee, he says that you can take a step back, like you can essentially step backwards and they miss. But I think he actually does call it out and say, yeah, you can slip your leg. If I have a longsword, just translating these from that one, if I'm here and they cut below my knee, I can slip the leg by bringing it back and then thrust right back forward. And I can do the same thing with Sabre. So I'm here, they're cutting below the knee, I'm slipping back, I'm thrusting right back in. I end up, I feel like when I'm gathering, I'm going into terse a lot, or quart a lot. But I feel like that's because it's weird to come back and not move your hand at all. Like to just gather your foot and go back. But I feel like it feels better. If I'm here, I'm going to catch it. I'm going to cut right back out. And that is something that we can do with, 5 and 6. Where we are here, they're cutting that lateral line that goes across the middle. We're going to catch it. We're going to cut right back out. Yeah, and so going back to what he was saying here, he's talking about high court and low court. I feel like you really have your court, and then if it is down past the point of your sword, dropping your sword lower, like you don't want to be so far that you've actually blocked it and now it's in the ground. But if you feel like you really need to go from here to here, that's fine. I mean, if you look at his high quart or his high second, it's at shoulder height. So you really are just catching it here and then thrusting in. And that can be lateral. So you can use that as a flat parry. It could be a little bit further out. I prefer a little further out because that gives you a follow-up thing that you can do that is not we're moving around, we're doing something else. Anytime we can parry and riposte, and it can all be in 1 or 2 motions, that is superior to we are parrying and then we have to cut around. Just because of tempo, just because it throws your tempo off. So here I'm going to parry and I'm going to cut, and this is going to take a second. But if I can parry in such a way that I then can thrust at them, this may be bringing it around maybe 2 tempos, maybe 3 tempos. This may be 1.5, right? I might be able to catch it and then just thrust. So if we go through our terse section, we're catching it in terse. I would say with this one, step into it. Some other things you might step backwards. With terse, I feel like you are stepping into it. You're going to catch it. You're going to thrust. And going back to Hutton's being weird when he's calling it a high and a low because he's here or he's down. I feel like this is kind of a terse. Just like going back to longsword, we've got short guard, but if you have to bring, like if I have to bring my hands up here, is this less a short guard? Like, no, it's just a high short guard. I don't know that I have to define them as separate because the motion should be the same. I should be catching it here and then I'm thrusting, or I should be catching it here and then I'm thrusting. But they should be the same. I should be doing that same thing with my saber. I'm catching it, I'm thrusting. I'm catching it, I'm thrusting. Well, those were from court, but the idea is the same, right? I'm still catching it, thrusting. Catching it, thrusting. Catching it, here's our sixth. We're going to catch it, we're going to thrust. So we have those two, or those, we're either turning it out or we're turning it this way. The source that I was playing with this morning, he talks about your arm. And he talks about not bending your arm too much. He's saying your structure is really what's important here. So he says you don't want to keep your arm completely straight. You can keep it a little bent, but the more bent that you have, the more it breaks your structure. So if I bend my arm, I mean, if I really bend my elbow all the way back, this does nothing for me for my structure. Especially if I'm parrying. If I'm parrying this way, so I'm parrying in terse, my elbow's bent, and I take a lot of force on there, that's just going to collapse my structure. I don't want it straight out because then I don't have a lot of room to work with, but I might be here where I've got a little bit of a bend to it, but if I have to, I can really just push straight into it. So if we play with those elbow positions, we're here in a little bit. We don't want to ever go back this far because this, having your elbow, so if I put my elbow right up against my body, it feels strong because it feels like, oh, all right, this is really easy. I can do a lot of things. But this bend is already breaking my structure. So if I'm trying to parry, like, it also has a disadvantage of it changes my angle. So I might be able to parry out here, but it changes the angle when it's too tucked in. It changes the angle of that parry. I might parry here and they still thrust over the top because I'm not far enough, my guard isn't far enough out that I'm actually staying safe. So we can practice some of those. We're just imagining in this case, we're imagining a 6 cut. And we're just going to parry, thrust, parry, thrust, parry, thrust, parry, thrust. How do people feel about those observations?
The only particular one would be the let's see, got Terse. I don't remember what he names the false edge equivalent.
Well,
but the true edge sets you up more for a thrust. The false edge sets you up for, again, another cut just across the face.
Yeah. And I think you can still thrust from there. I feel like you can still parry with that false edge. But yeah, since you're on the inside, you've now parried, and making a cut is easy because you've now taken the inside by putting your sword in a position that you've
I think because you end up false edge out here, I don't think your point ends up further offline when you do that false edge.
Right.
Otherwise, you end up breaking your wrist doing this. But if your tip is further off to your right, so it has travel distance to come across for cut. Whereas if you keep it directly in front of you, you break your wrist, and you're only traveling like from here to here. Whereas if you're carry out here, then you're able to come all the way across because you're out here coming all the way across. Versus if you're right here, broken wrist, you don't have any rotation there.
And I feel like there's from that 6 from the false edge, there really is enough room here to make that rotation to make a decent cut. I haven't cut with a saber in a while, but I feel like this much rotation with a good sharp sword, I've made that much rotation work with the long sword just from here to here. Like, okay, we're just making a really easy cut this way. That may have been cheating because I was using the 18C, which I then can make all kinds of really, really slow cuts very easily. But I feel like with the Sabre, you absolutely can make a solid cut from here to here with just, I mean, you're just using your wrist, you're just using your arm. And I think I've said it before, but I think it bears saying again. With a lot of this saber work, you are using your wrist, you're using the speed of the weapon. You're not doing a lot of, okay, I'm going to cut and I'm using my hips to make this cut. You're doing more, okay, I'm going to use my wrist. Like I'm going to kind of whip my arm to make that cut solid versus, okay, I'm going to use my hips and that's what's going to drive it. It's doable because you're using a lighter weapon that can be moved more quickly. Any other observations on those terse? Again, I feel like Seconde is a good position to catch it, but it has some disadvantages because then you have to do something else to cut from there. But much like some of these other guards or some of these other parries, it is good for you have stopped the bad thing. I have stopped that cut. Now I'm going to move off it. I'm going to do something else. It might be that I have stopped it in Seconde, and now I'm going to step to the outside, and I'm essentially going to pass over. I'm going to step out this way. It changes your measure because you're trying to pass to the outside, but I feel like it can still work because you're still stepping away from that sword. Okay, next ones. We have Prime, and we have Court. So our Prime is here. We're just parrying. Again, 5 and Prime, you are parrying that cut 5. So we're here. They're cutting along a straight line. If you want to think about it as low as your belly button, that's fine. But we're really thinking about a lateral cut or a horizontal cut at the middle of the chest. So we're here. We're going to catch it. And then we can do the same thing with quart. So we are in that middle position, and essentially we're just bringing it up. Remember what he tells us to do with this is we're bringing it up in such a way that our fingernails are going upwards. So we're pairing to the outside this way. Here. Something that I'm finding interesting as I'm practicing this is that going from that middle to quart is faster. It's definitely faster to do quart. But if you're in a situation that, I don't know, whatever, essentially you're dropping the point this way.
I think if your point is lower, if you're at a point where your point is lower for any reason, prime makes more sense. If your point is middle or higher, then quart is definitely faster. But if you've dropped your point and then you have to raise it again, you can just drop it and go out to prime. Whereas if your point's already in the center, you just simply move your hand out.
Right. Right. And I think, and some of that could be, let's say that you've let a little bit of laziness get in your fencing, right? You're here, you're keeping your point up, nothing's happening, you're kind of, oh, well, okay, now my point's drifted from being at their face and it's kind of down here, then it does make sense to just drop into that.
Yep. Or let's say you came in for a cut, they parried, now you're retreating, but your cut, came past that center line, that horizontal center line, you retreat into prime.
And as a retreating motion, I think it makes a lot of sense. They're cutting at you, and rather than catching it this way, you're just here and you're going to drop it. You're going to gather it together and then cut over the top. So you can catch it here and you can just catch it with prime and then cut over the top. Again, I honestly don't think that teaching quart and low quart makes a lot of sense as separate things. We can practice it as separate things if you want. As a generalist, my feeling is that quart should be good here, but it should also be good here, and this should all be varied on where your opponent's cut is coming to. If they're coming low, then you want to catch it down here. But because he says that this is quart, and then he says this is low quart, does that mean that this is middle? Like, I don't feel like we have to have hand positions for everything all the way down, because as long as we remember that we're doing this motion, if they're cutting low, we may have to catch it low. We may have to catch it in a low quart, but we may have to catch it kind of in that low position. And again, these are against those 5s and 6s. When we get to the last two, we have our octave, we have our seconde. Our octave, we are stopping with, so with this one, it's a little hard to see on this diagram, but the fingernails are up. We're catching it here. And that one is to the outside, but I really feel like on this one you're catching it with the false edge. So we're really just catching it this way with the false edge, with our fingernails up. Our hand is out here. We're catching it, and then we can bring that point up and thrust. Or then we have our octave, which is here, or we have our seconde. So this is our high seconde, this is our seconde. We have octave or seconde, just depending on the hand position. Whether the palm is up or the palm is down is going to determine which one of those it is. With octave, we are absolutely we're catching it with the false edge. And with seconde, we're catching it with the true edge.
Kind of amazingly, I'm noticing the same thing there. For octave, if your point is low, it makes sense. If your point is higher, seconde makes more sense.
Right. And I feel like if you're saying if your point's high, you're going into octave. Is that what you feel like is?
So if your point is low, it would make more sense to go into octave. If your point is high, seconde is easier to move to.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're here, and it's easier just to drop it down. It's easier to go from that middle and drop it down. In fact, going from terse, terse with actually a flip down is seconde. If we pair it in terse, all of a sudden we're down, we're in seconde. It's weird. Horizontal chord. Here is my 2 cents about the 6 and the 7 cuts. St. George's Guard and Quart are okay, but you shouldn't really be trying to cut along that center line. Catching it here or catching it here is fine. Unfortunately, when we look at this picture, it looks like his horizontal quart, his sword is almost over his leg. Like it's almost just sitting on top of his leg. I don't like that because I feel like if you're trying to stop a cut, you don't want to stop it right on your leg. You really want to put it out a little bit so that you've actually caught it and you have a little bit of leeway. But I don't know if that makes sense to practice, but we can. So if we go back into our medium, we're just going to drop it down and cut and catch it. I also feel like if we catch it in quart, in that horizontal quart, it then makes sense to move off that line to something else. So we may be catching it over the leg, and then we're blocking it across the other side.
Do you think that the horizontal quart is used to catch their blade, or do you think it's more of like a resting type position when you're out of distance? Because that's what it looks like to me.
You think about it more of as a resting position?
Well, I don't know if that's accurate, but just how it's like right against his legs and it's like, my arm's tired, I'm gonna rest here for a second while we're out of distance. It just seems really awkward to try to catch the blade that way without slipping your leg or doing something else. I don't know. I might be thinking about it wrong though.
Right. So I think that's definitely an option. It could just be okay, I'm going to hang out. We are way out of measure. Like, I can't hit you. You can't hit me. I'm just going to hang out here. If we look at boar's tooth in the Italian longsword, this is kind of an easy position to just kind of hang out in when you're out of measure, right? Could be the same thing here. You're just keeping that point up until they engage with it, has the disadvantage that now you're holding it up there. But
I do think there is something to be said, though. And again, there's may not be very many people who are going to be cutting a straight up vertical cut.
right?
But if somebody is cutting that vertical straight up cut, like honestly, that is probably the most, like you're probably going to slip the leg and keep your sword out to collect it, and then set it out to like second or something. But there's not a whole lot of other practical ways to actually defend against somebody who, if they are in fact cutting this completely vertical straight up cut. In order to defend that, like you have to put your sword out, because I mean, you could try to like, and think of it, I think not as a static position perhaps, but maybe you're gonna basically from middle, you're gonna void your leg, step back into that horizontal court, and then set it out 2 seconds. So like your middle, you step back, you collect that vertical cut coming up against your sword, and then you set it to the outside so you can then come back in with something else. But there's not very many other ways with this weapon to effectively defend against somebody who is in fact cutting this straight up.
Especially because you're dealing with a sword in one hand, right? If you have a long sword, you can drop and you can go into kind of that half sword position. In this case, you're just dropping it across so that you've stopped it. I look at St. George and I look at this one as very transitional positions, but they are a really easy stopgap to do something else. St. George's guard, you catch it, and then you're likely to just roll it off and then make a cut. Or you catch it, and for whatever reason, they're pressing towards the hands here. At that point in time, bring it up into that high, the high terse. I think you have the same advantage here potentially. So they make the cut, and you've caught it, you've stopped the action, and then you move it, and then you can do something else. Or they catch it, and it ends up being a little closer to your hands. You may actually end up not going. You're not necessarily, if they catch it close to the hands, you're not going to bring it this way, because then you're coming underneath the blade. You've actually put their blade on the wrong side, because if I've caught it and then I come this way, I may have actually just cleared the line for them. But so this makes more sense. If it's on this side, it actually makes more sense. But I also feel like you're going to stop it with horizontal court, just like you do with St. George's guard. And then you're going to step in a direction. St. George's guard, you're never just catching it and then you're just going to cut straight out on this same line. You're probably going to step to the outside so that you can make a cut. Or you're going to roll it off and make a cut. Here, I feel like you're going to catch it with that horizontal, and then you might cut this way. Or you're going to catch it, and then you might bring it here to cut. But the other thing to remember is that he calls these out as parries. And I feel like we run into a problem with these in a way that because we traditionally have practiced longsword, we get in this idea that this is where I'm going to make a cut from, rather than this is how I'm going to defend it, and then here is my riposte, here is my response to it. This one is absolutely a response to a cut from below. But to your point, Kim, I think you could just stay, you're way out of measure, like, all right, cool, I'm gonna hang out here until we get close enough that I'm actually even worried about it, and then maybe I'm gonna bring it up to that medium bow. So we have that horizontal, and then we have our two that are on the inside. We have our low prime and our sept. So our low prime, where we're just bringing it, low prime is with the, point down. So we're here for our high prime, we're here with our low prime. We're here. For the second. So that prime and that second actually tie together, right? You're here or here, you're here or here, depending on which side it is. They are functionally mirrors of each other in a way. If it's here and here, those are very much the same as here and here. It's just a question of which side, whether you're to the inside or the outside. And if we look at it, this may be an easy way to tie some of these together very well. We have our prime, right? Then we have low prime. On this side, we have quart, and we have low quart. And then if we flip this wrist, we have sept. So we have our high prime, or our prime, our low prime, quart, and then we're just flip that wrist down. No, we're gonna flip the wrist. So we're gonna flip it forward. That's how we end up in sept. On the other side, we have our terse. And then we flip it. No, we flip it to octave. So terse, octave. So if we want to practice those together, we can really think about them going from top to bottom. We have our high terse, our low terse, and then we're just going to flip it this way for our octave. We have high prime. We have low prime. No, we have second. Right? Yeah. So we have high second, we have second. And these are just, I think by giving them the same name, what we're doing is we are tying them together as these are the same position. The reason that they are high, they are low, or they are the thing itself is based on its positioning. So you're effectively doing the same thing in high terse as terse and low terse. These are all the same thing. High quart, low quart, all the same thing. So we can practice those on that third cut. So if they're cutting from underneath, we're just dropping down either false edge or true edge. So fingers up, fingers down. Do you have any observations on those? Other than I probably need to sit down.
No, I just think that it's, from a practical perspective, practicing moving to those parries quickly.
Right.
It's useful.
And I feel like if you look at if we're looking at the cut 8, the horizontal court and the second are kind of variants from each other. It's really easy to catch it over the leg or bring it to the outside, depending on where. I can see one turning into the other very easily. You catch it over the leg, now you've brought it over here. And I feel like these are very much this is not necessarily there is a right time and a wrong time to do these particular things, but what position are you in? Which one is faster? Because what you could find out is that some of them are going to be faster. Some of them are necessarily going to work better from the position you're in before. One thing that we could try is we could try just moving from each to each. So if somebody cuts, we're going to catch it in with that first cut. We're actually going to catch it in. This is so awkward. It's flipped. That's why it's okay. If they make that first cut, you're actually going to counter it with a terse because they're cutting from the right to the left, which then becomes your left. That makes sense. So we're just going to catch it. They're going to make that cut. We're going to catch it, and then we can do something else. Here, out here, out here. High prime, prime, low prime. The thing I really feel like is important to point out here with all of this is as we go through these guards, and I'm going to stop sharing so that we can, if people want to look at it, that link is still, I'm just going to leave it in that Google Drive. If we look at these guards and these parries, they're very much, this is something you're going to move into. It's a way of stopping the blade. But they're not necessarily starting points, unless you want them to be starting points. When we think about the joystick, the joystick theory, by moving back into that medium, you're in a position that you can respond to all of those directions very quickly. If I enter the fight, and I go into the fight, and I'm just standing up here, where is my opponent going to cut? Well, they're not going to cut here because it's already guarded. If I'm smart, if somebody comes at me this way, I'm just going to attack them down here because this is the furthest distance they have to move. I can move pretty quickly from here to here. I can move pretty quickly from here and drop it down somehow, right? This is the easiest quadrant to to attack. So if I'm coming into the fight this way, it gives a really easy, okay, here's where you attack. And I feel like that's what he's doing with his medium guard. Is he's using it like a joystick where you make your cut and then you return to the medium guard. Make your cut, you return to medium. You make your cut, you return to medium. Because that gives you that starting position that you can make anything from. The medium isn't threatening anything except the thrust from here, but it can parry anything because it is just as close to this quadrant as it is to this quadrant. And this quadrant to this quadrant, and it's super easy with those horizontal cuts. I would argue that his cut 5 and cut 6 are legitimately, his cut 5 and cut 6 are much easier to parry because if you're in that medium position, it is very easy to just stop and stop and stop. And you can move very quickly without even changing your hand position to those other sides. Observations or questions on that stuff?
So maybe you mentioned this, Jordan, but I was looking over these guards again and trying to figure out naming, like what, because some of them have, high and low and everything, high prime, low, all that stuff, and some of them have straight unique names. And I'm not I'm not referring specifically to St. George's Guard or the one was the horizontal court. But as I was kind of experimenting here, it feels like their names are, and maybe you mentioned this, their names are based upon how your hand is holding the sword. Like one being whether or not you're holding it with your palm out versus fingers out with stuff. Because I was noticing, let's see if I can. So you have like the octave. Right, you have the high octave, and then you have just octave.
Right.
And when you have your hand up like this, and then you bring it, and you keep your hand in that same kind of hold, but you just bring it straight down, you're now an octave.
Right. Right.
And maybe you mentioned that already, but that was just one thing I was like, because some of these names, I was having some problems remembering exactly like how they're associated with each other, because some of them aren't because you got high tiers and tiers, but then you don't have like a low tier, so on the other, and then you have like octave, which is kind of all over the place, it feels like.
It's above and it's below.
Yeah, or like court, you've got a high court, you've got a court, and then you have a horizontal court. Right. And so it just it doesn't feel like there's necessarily a pattern. And the only thing I can tell is that it feels like your hand position, how you're actually holding the sword, whether or not you're like your fingers out, your palm, if your palm out, if your back of hand out, in other various positions seems to be the only thing that seems to correspond to each other.
So the thing that I see most about these is it seems like your hand position is consistent all the way through high court, low court, right? It's all in the same position.
Right.
Here.
Right.
Yeah.
High prime is across over here, prime, low prime. It's still staying in that same position. So I think your hand position, I think you're 100% right on that hand position. If we look at the outliers, if we look at horizontal court, we're over the knee.
But I think horizontal court, you're still here. Like,
yeah,
you're not changing that hand position.
Because the only thing that you're changing really is where your arm is.
Right.
So
I think the only sync outlier is sept, right?
yeah, because that's the only one that's different, and that's the only one I think you'd ever parry with a hand position like that.
Right.
Because if you've got your open palm like that, and you've got the false edge, right? That's false edge. Yeah, false edge out. Like you're never gonna parry that same way with that hand position.
You're pairing with the true edge though.
You are
On
parrying
that
with the true edge. That's right.
because
Yeah.
you're parrying something that's coming to your inside.
Yeah, because you're not because as you're parrying this way, but then as you move up, your hands are still changing because you're rotating your wrist if you're going
Right.
to the next those other ones.
But when you turn your wrists to do that one, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
Like bringing it up this way, this is a bad wrist position anyway.
right.
It works in that sept, but I feel like it's even a little hairy there because it works. But once you get up here, now my wrist is in a stupid position. Like that's
It's
a
100%
really bad place to be in. And all of a sudden somebody pushes against that, and then that's just going to push my hand back. Like,
Yeah, because your wrist is already broken. You have no strength and structure there anymore.
horizontal court could theoretically have a horizontal terse, except horizontal terse doesn't make any sense at all. Because if we're in terse and we wanted to do I guess that's horizontal court. I guess for naming, you kind of have to do the same thing, right? So you have your court. I'm not sure why he doesn't. Actually, I don't know why he doesn't call that. Actually, don't know why he doesn't call it horizontal terse. Because if you have your terse, it almost makes sense to call this terse too, versus court. And then, but I don't know. They are going over your leg makes sense with a one-handed weapon is a parrying motion. Anything out here doesn't make any sense at all. He does say when we're talking about he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about cut 7 and cut 8, but when you are parrying against those cuts, it makes sense to have it come across your body. He calls it horizontal court. We'll stay with that naming convention because this, and then just bringing it out is fine. Like that's okay. I do feel like you could call it horizontal terse and not be weird because you're terse. But
I think the biggest difference, though, is that with your terse versus your court, with why he probably names it court, is because as you're coming down, you still have to actually turn your wrist to get to that position.
yeah.
And whereas with court, you're already in that position.
Yeah,
Whereas,
you're changing your arm position, but yeah.
yeah. But I see what you're saying too, Jordan. Is it's a very minute detail.
Right, and he doesn't talk a lot. I mean, he doesn't talk about those lateral cuts a lot. He doesn't talk about the cut from above and the cut from below as much as he includes all of the other cuts. I think because those two also have their unique problems. So a cut from straight above, if you don't move at all, can be parried with a St. George's guard. If you move to the right or you move to the left, they can be parried with high terse or high court just as easily. If they're coming straight from above, you can parry either way as long as you step opposite. Like that St. George's guard is great if it comes straight down and you stop it straight from above. But you can also just step in and catch it with a high court instead of St. George's Guard.
Yeah.
He also says that this is Hutton actually says that it is formerly called St. George's Guard. This is where we get into a little bit of hairiness, because he says it's formerly called St. George's Guard. But as we play with multiple sources, we may as well call it St. George's Guard, because that's what the other sources are referring to it as anyway.
That gives the impression that he would call it something different if it didn't already have a common name.
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm not really sure. Okay, so formerly called St. George's Guard, but when you look at older texts, they call it St. George's Guard. So I'm like, all right, so let's just leave it that way. Doesn't make sense to
change it for no reason.
And I would argue that in the case of Hutton, we're dealing with a unique situation. He's writing this at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. And so he's writing it to an already diminished crowd, potentially using some of these terms. So a lot of the broadsword texts we have say, here's your inside guard, here's your outside guard. That's all they give them. They don't say, here is your high terse, here's your low terse, here's your high court, here's your low court. They don't even call them court and terse. They call them inside and outside. The reasoning behind these for Hutton specifically is he is using naming conventions that come out of Olympic fencing of the time that are easy for Olympic fencers to read and say, okay, my terse is still a terse. So if I am doing Olympic foil, if I am doing, what we call Olympic foil, if I'm doing that thing, then this hand position isn't any different with the saber than it is with a foil. At the time we are talking about, you're talking about historical foil. So you're talking about small sword as far as the actual sharpened one that you're using. If you're using a sharpened sword at all, but a lot of this stuff was just for play at this point. It was a sport, but it was you're playing at sticks. But it's also, I feel like he's really trying to appeal to people who already know it. And in one of his early sections, he actually calls us out and he says that the way that you should learn a lot of this is to study foil fencing. I'm not willing to teach foil fencing online to our class. Could we do it if we were meeting in person? Maybe, but I know a lot of Olympic groups that we could just study with, and that would be easier. But I feel like his naming conventions come out of this is what it is, but I also feel like the audience that he is reaching out to is an audience of people who already do. It would be like HEMA people reaching out to people who already do some sort of a sword art to grow our art. Like, we already know people that are using our swords. Why don't we reach out to them? Because that's the best way for us to get new members.
Right.
So I feel like that's where some of his naming conventions come from. But I do think that you're 100% right on the hand position remains the same through all of them, which means that you're just keeping that hand position, whether it's high, whether it's if we want to call it something, we can call it high, middle, and low, although he doesn't call it middle prime or middle terse or what have you. In part because middle and medium get weird, and then you're like, oh, well, is it medium or is it middle? Or but if we think about them as just naming conventions that come out of the hand positions the same, there are more cuts there are more guards than this, but not that we get from Hutton. There are other guards that Olympic fencing uses, but I don't know about anybody else, but every time that I have done foil fencing, kind of terse and court are my go-to parry riposte, because all you're doing is you're just keeping it on that middle. You just bring it off to one side or the other. All right, we are about out of time. Something you learned today? Sparring with whoever.
I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I was playing a little bit more with actually keeping myself back weighted. And one of the things that I kind of noticed is, especially like if you're going from a parry to a cut, it was easier to make double steps with my lead foot by doing that. So I step in with my lead foot and then step in again to make a follow-up cut or thrust.
By back weighting?
Yeah. So by keeping back weighted, I was able to quickly make double movements with just my lead foot instead of the more traditional where you're switching from one leg to the other, like longsword and etc. Like by more keeping that weight back, it was easier to make that step with just the lead foot. Sticking with again kind of the more systemic approach that Hutton uses.
That's good. Somebody else?
Yeah, so I learned to think of the parries in like paired groups based on where your hand is, and then you just like drop the point, bend at the wrist and drop the point, but your hand position is the same. So like court and sept. And then there's like almost half as many parries that you have to learn.
Right. And honestly, the takeaway that I've really hit over this month with it is that by looking at it that way, if you look at it, he has 19 positions, which is a lot. Like that's a whole lot to look at and be like, I've got to memorize these 19 parries. But you think about high terse, and low terse as terse, there's 3. And high court, there's another 3. Well, there's 6 of your 19 already. You throw out medium and you throw out that first position as a starting position, then you're up to 8, and then it becomes a lot more manageable. That's good. Delon, George.
I mean, similar like the naming convention stuff that we talked about, and it's just it's knowing how you're positioning your hand, and then it's just moving your arm into the correct position is definitely helpful. And then I was kind of experimenting too with certain guards moving, like bringing my lead foot back, so, moving the leg back, or like potentially even moving it a little bit forward. Basically, the idea of like cutting into the parry, or like moving into the parry versus retreating into the parry, and it was just kind of an interesting exercise where, and especially like with those, if you need to move into a guard that potentially will take a little bit more time, or that it's good to move in because you're coming across a lot of the time on those kinds of guards. I feel like a lot of the time moving back, retreating back, and then being able to then potentially follow up with then lunging back out with the riposte made a lot more sense. Where I felt like when they were on the other side, it almost made a lot more sense to move in to the parry. But not always, but a lot, or to be stationary, I should say, like to either move into it or to stay relatively equal.
And the advantage there is the more that you can teach yourself both, and this doesn't just go for Sabre, this goes for longsword. The more that you can teach yourself both, the more that you, okay, I'm going to choose what I'm going to do. So you're going to make a cut forward, I'm going to step back, or I'm going to step into it, or I'm going to step into it away, or I'm going to step into it. Like, but it's good to be able to do all of those things because then that gives you options. George?
Honestly, something you said earlier about just elbow positioning kind of, I don't know, stuck out to me. Because I've been trying to do a lot of these things with a very straight arm and elbow, and just bending it a little and kind of finding that range between what's too bent and what's not bent enough has helped.
Good.
That's one that's always it's a constant calibration point, because we say, like, keep your arms straight so you have structure, but then we start saying, like, okay, pull things in closer to you so you have less distance to move, which requires some degree of bend of the elbow. But of course, once your elbow is bent, then you're using your muscles instead of structure. So there is always that kind of balance point there.
Something I learned today. It's interesting how, and I've been practicing a lot of this week because I've been trying to throw in some cuts, throw in some thrusts with some things that I've worked on. It's interesting how just working on that footwork still is killing my legs, and I think it's just a question of I need to do it more. But it also tells me that I'm applying it versus I'm just standing upright. I think it's important to stand upright, but I also feel like you need to step into that stance, and if that means that your thighs hurt for a little bit, then it means that they hurt for a little bit, and then you get better. So. Okay, we will see everybody next week. Plan is we will do some broadsword. Be good.
Also, like mentioned at the beginning of class, it'll be a new Zoom link. I will get those generated and I'll email those out. So it'll be a new Zoom link for both Thursdays and Saturdays. Awesome. I'll just do the same thing where there's going to be a Saturday link for all of December and a Thursday link for all of December.
That makes a lot of things easier because I feel like it's a lot better than last time when we were doing it like, okay, we have a new Zoom link every day or every week.
Yeah.
I just kind of saved those emails and then I'm like, okay, here's the email for Saturday. Here's the email for Thursday. And it makes life easier. All righty. Well, everybody have a good weekend and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. See you guys.
Bye.
Yep.